business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome to the latest episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me is she who puts the P in positioning, Lorraine Kessler. Lorraine, how are you doing today?
Oh, Mark, you never cease to amaze me with these introductions. I'm doing great.
Good, good. I am fighting allergy season, so if I sound a little verklempt today, I am.
Yeah, well, it happens. Although
Yes, it does.
mine have been less. It's weird because they say they come and go, but a lot of the allergies I used to have, I don't have now. So
Yeah, good,
good.
excellent.
Well,
Well, do you have any rants today? I think our listeners would be disappointed if we didn't pull something out of our hat.
Well, I just think it's not so much a rant, it's an observation, perhaps, that some of the big brands that you and I have grown up with, I more than you grew up with McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
That was my first job as in fact, was I worked at McDonald's and Starbucks, which I think you did grow up with more than
Mhm.
I did. And both those brands, I think, are seeing some difficult times and responding in different ways.
Mhm.
And I just wonder if the ways that they're responding are sufficient totally to where they are in their trajectory. Because you and I have talked, I think that every brand has a life, a lifespan, and what can happen, just like stars in our universe, is they start to die, right?
Yeah.
And how do you reclaim that fire and that fascination when your brand becomes so established over time that it becomes somewhat stale or less, let's say, less bright? And McDonald's is responding by responding to the price of their product, which has
Mhm.
been insane.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it really
$20 Happy Meals.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think my daughter said it cost her $60 to feed her family at McDonald's, which that's unbelievable. But I think McDonald's has more of a problem than pricing. Their food quality, I know, because the restaurant I worked in New Jersey was a test kitchen. So we launched the Quarter Pounder. We were one of the restaurants. We launched Egg McMuffin. We launched pancakes. And I got a Quarter Pounder, maybe it was the first one I had in many, many years, but I got one maybe a few months ago before I started doing my keto or low carb cycling. And it was the worst tasting. I don't even know what it was. It had no resemblance to what the Quarter Pounder distinctively was. So to me, if they just lower price and the food quality goes away, and is that discernibly different? I'm not sure that's going to be a total fix. Yeah.
Well, we know Starbucks, we talked about that last time, putting in drive-throughs, which absolutely takes away from the coffee experience that they developed.
Right.
It's like they're going backwards to what they started out having as a brilliant way to break into what would otherwise be a commodity market, which was coffee.
Right.
So
yeah, and they're focusing now on faster service because people have complained about how long it takes to get a very common even cup of coffee or a cappuccino, something that's not that hard. And so they're responding by speeding up the line, which really is again about that drive-through. And I just wonder, what does that do to the aura? There's such a fragile thing called the mystique of a brand.
Yeah.
And convenience is rarely a fix for that. Rarely.
Yep. Well, good. I think we have a fun topic for our listeners these next couple episodes. And just for a change of pace, I'm going to let you introduce our topic today, Lorraine.
Well, thanks, Mark. Well, having been a positionist for most of my career, which goes on now 4 decades, one of the things, as you know, that I would do is create book notes from books, attend different seminars. I had the pleasure, at the invitation of our CEO, Dick Majori, to attend a seminar led by Tim Williams, who wrote the book Positioning for Professionals.
Mhm.
And while what's in his book isn't particularly new, it's just that he has a different perspective on how to talk about positioning, particularly to those industries such as ours and any kind of financial planning or medical. That's a service oriented business. And so he puts it within that kind of lens. And he did a really nice job, and it's a very good book. So if anybody can grab that book, but I would do notes and then I would share these notes with our account team and anyone else who wanted to learn more about positioning, because I feel like that's the ongoing dedication you have
Mhm.
to the principles that underline what we think about and why we think they're so important. So, anyway, that said, I took his book and when I translated it, I called them exploding myths.
Hmm.
Myths that clients would typically come into us as seeking outside agency help, would
Hmm.
come kind of, I think, already in their cabanza, and we'd have to dispel or
Mhm.
set aside
Yep.
uh, so that they could see anew how important differentiation is as the prime idea, the primary idea. It's not that these other things are necessarily bad. It's just that they're not they shouldn't be given as much emphasis as differentiation. And I always think it's about emphasis, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
yeah,
Well, we have quite a few of these that we're going to be throwing onto the screen. And Lorraine, you take the odd ones this time,
okay,
and I'll take the even ones. So go ahead and introduce the first myth. We'll call
right.
these myths, and then we'll explode them.
Okay, the myth one is that the better company, the better product, the better service wins. Okay.
Yep.
And it kind of relates to what we were just talking about with what McDonald's and what I think Starbucks are doing. Now, this is not to say that companies shouldn't try to be better and adopt best practices and take what is known to perfect their service, the delivery of it, the convenience of it, whatever. But it's to say again, it's not as important, or it's not in terms of the perception you're trying to create, and positioning is a battle for the mind. It's not as important as having a unique difference that
Mhm.
sets you apart, right? And the problem is that everybody thinks I want to be better. So they think if it's faster, if it's cheaper, if it's this, or it matches their competition, which we're going to get into, I think, in one of these myths, that somehow that's where the Holy Grail is. And
Mhm.
we're here to say the Holy Grail is in differentiation. And one of the foundational elements of this myth too is that, and I just heard an ad, I can't remember who it was for the other day, that we have better people. And I mean, every time I hear that, I laugh. I like,
I
what
know it
pool,
makes you. Uh,
right? What pool are they hiring from,
yeah.
right? Right? The only way you're having better people is there is no way, because you
Yeah.
can pay a lot more and you might not get better, more motivated associates or employees. You might just get more entitled people
Mhm.
who care more about money than doing a great job.
Yep.
So, that's just one of the big fallacies. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of what these myths try to expose. So that's number one. That's
Good.
number one.
Yeah. Well, myth number two is my business is a commodity.
Hmm.
And I always like to, when I introduce positioning to classrooms, and I've done this recently at a couple colleges, um, I always like to say, if you can differentiate the toothpaste aisle, you can
Hmm.
differentiate anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, our definition of a brand is that consumers are willing to pay more money for an idea, okay, that has value above another product in which they have an assigned value to it.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, I believe it's Michael Porter that says there's only two ways to differentiate. Am I getting the right person there? You either you have you're either differentiating on price, you're differentiating on value. And
Hmm.
by value, he's talking about providing meaning to the brand, something beyond just price. So a feature, like going to the toothpaste aisle, it's toothpaste for sensitive teeth or whitening. or something that goes beyond just dollars and cents.
Or even being a leader where there's built in credibility,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
there's, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, the problem is there's no really, as he says in his book, there's no such thing as a commodity.
Hmm.
Um, he uses the example of airlines where they think there's some kind of a special case and that other categories are much easier to brand. Well, I would say an airline is
Hmm.
able to provide a lot more value than a toothpaste.
Yeah,
Um, and they point to places like Starbucks. But as we just said, Starbucks came out of what? Coffee.
yeah,
We could all get back in the day, I know I'm dating myself here, but we could get a cup of coffee for a quarter
yeah,
and maybe going further back, a dime or a nickel.
yeah.
So what did they come out of? They came out of what we would typically classify as completely a commodity.
Right,
And when there were no strong coffee brands, that's when Starbucks developed.
right.
So I always look at this too. I
Yeah,
always say, water. Why in the world would we pay more dollars and cents for something like this when we can go get it for fractions of a penny out of a tap?
right.
And yet, this is a $6 billion a year industry.
Incredible. Right.
And that's just regular water. If you add in sparkling water and flavored water and all those other things, you're talking about paying much more for something that in the past was the ultimate commodity. So it just is hard to fathom that someone would pay up to 1,000 times the cost of tap water just to
Yeah,
buy it in a bottle.
and I'll give kudos to, it wasn't us who did this. I wish we did, but it's the right position. There's a law firm in our market called Zankos, Placos, and Manos.
Uh-huh.
You're
They're
familiar
just
with them,
Placus now. Hmm.
right? It's just Placos now. But their position became the law lions.
Hmm.
And what do you think of as a lion? The attributes, right?
Yep.
Ferocious and big and can eat prey. They are fierce litigators,
Yeah.
fierce, and they won that huge case with against Oberlin College, as you remember a few years
Oh
ago.
yeah.
And it so fits their personality, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really who they are. So, yeah, even law firms can be differentiated,
Oh yeah.
and that's why this book was written for service businesses to say not only things that come out of the ground
Yeah.
like commodities can be differentiated,
Yep.
um, but also services, professional services.
Well, and I think when we hear commodity, you and I, our minds go to people that I don't want to cast aspersions, but it's maybe lazy thinking instead
Yeah.
of smart thinking, right? Smart thinking, maybe that's a better way to say better people in that commercial you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
But smart thinking is something that provides value in a service industry.
right.
Clients can really get good service anywhere, but proactive thought leadership is, I think, in this day and age, in short supply. And guess what's making it worse? All the chatter about AI.
Right,
AI at its core is actually about copying everything. It's
right.
going out, it's big data, right? But that big data already exists. All it's doing is grabbing pieces, parts, and putting it together in a different way that wasn't
Yeah,
put together before. But the heart of the thinking can't change in that case.
right, right.
So, really, I think the way to explode this myth in that nothing needs to be a commodity is apply smart thinking, apply passionate thinking. Don't be lazy in your marketing.
Yeah,
And that's the way that I would explode this myth.
right. And sometimes it's thinking about what's table stakes. What do we have if we're a law firm or we're a financial firm or whatever we are? What do we have to do because that is such a common that is expected by clientele,
Hmm.
so that it becomes table stakes. I have to do that,
Yeah.
right? Like Domino's, if I'm going to make pizza, it has to be
Taste so
fairly good, and fast food has to be can't be below that line. Doesn't have to be the best pizza in the world, but it has to meet a certain threshold. That's what we call table stakes.
Yep.
And then thinking now, how do I differentiate on top of that?
Yep.
So I think that's a way of it. And you just
Yeah.
mentioned AI, and that goes to our next myth, which is the myth that competition is to blame for commoditization. And while competition um, might be a result, it's not the cause of competition, of commoditization. The cause of it is this urge to copy,
Mhm.
right? We as humans have a species, have a natural desire to copy, right? Mimic. Like you ever stay in a room and someone yawns and everybody starts yawning, or you see people doing this and we tend to do that. I mean, we're very apish, right?
Mhm.
It's just our makeup. So what we do is we have this urge, we take this kind of urge into the business, and that's the root cause of commoditization. We think if our competitor is doing this, then somehow I have to do it without evaluating. Well, maybe they're doing it because it fits their differentiation better than my differentiation. If I don't have a differentiation, then I'm going to copy them. And now I've just led to commoditizing my product. And it leads to commoditization of entire categories. And
Mhm.
we've also seen this in terms of how brands or how marketers market, right? You
Mhm.
mentioned AI, but even before AI, look at the what we used to call, or we sometimes have called, the orthodoxy of how whole categories talk about healthcare, or they talk about legal or financial, and they feel like they have to talk in these similar tones. Their
Mhm.
marketing messages all sound alike. They show the same happy, satisfied people, right? These stock images that appear everywhere, and you see them on, one person's billboard and another person's in the same category, which is
Yeah.
the ultimate undifferentiation. So the problem with this is it erodes not only your distinction or differentiation, but it erodes pricing power.
Mhm.
Because once you say, I'm like everybody else, and you talk and look like everybody else, then you are now subject to what the market at large says. I think this is what I should pay for this service or category. So it's really one of the deadliest things, and it's so innate in us that I understand why it's so hard for companies to break and marketers to break.
Yeah.
So part of this, I think, AI is taking the place of what we used to call the Deming best practices, right? And like I said earlier, don't stop at best practices. No one's telling you to have bad practices. We're telling you that that might just be what's needed to bring you level,
Mhm.
equal to. Now you have to layer on, how are we different? That's how you become incomparable, not comparable.
Yep. Well, even in our industry, most people don't know there's 16,000 agencies in the US alone. Well, if that's not competition that should drive us to commoditization,
Right,
now all we're doing is our hourly rate lower than everyone else's.
right,
But as we know, we have taken positioning to a specialist level that nobody else has. That's why we can claim this, and we have Jack Trout's endorsement for it. Um, but we keep working at it. Even
right,
this podcast is about positioning. Our blog articles are about positioning. We keep reading books about it. Um, and you have to work at differentiation. You can't just assume it.
right,
So I think that is if you're trying to look at an industry and say, well, nobody has as many competitors as we do. Well, we have 15,999. I
right,
don't know too many other clients that we have that could walk in and say that they have almost 16,000 competitors.
right. And I remember in the 2000s, of course, you know this because this is where you walked a lot of your career, where the website, the internet, digital started to come on, right? What
Hmm.
did agencies do to differentiate? They became all web,
Yeah.
they became all digital. And that gave them some lift for some amount of time.
Hmm.
The problem with that kind of differentiation, just for those who are listening, is based on a feature, right? Or
Yep.
a skill set that can be replicated quickly. So once the skill set's replicated, those agencies had real trouble because now they're no longer differentiated. How many digital agencies are there? How many web only? Not many, because being web only tended to be about having the technical expertise of how to do a website or put it up. It didn't have anything to do with the psychology of what makes advertising and marketing work, how to craft a message. And so those agencies felt after about 2 decades, they got stuck in a trap, right?
Yep.
And we saw them start saying, and we do branding too. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
oh,
little
okay,
tag on there.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the one I always love is everyone that you ever see in the ad agency world says, "We get results."
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
great. Okay.
yeah. What kind of
'Cause-
results are you talking about? Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And how come I don't recognize any of the people you work for, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Good. Well, myth number 4, and this one's interesting because we don't hear it a lot, and yet it's an unspoken statement that is a fact a lot, and that is we're not a brand.
Hmm.
And where we see that a lot is with professional service firms like law firms, ad
Hmm.
agencies, believe it or not, will say that, accounting firms. They usually see themselves as consultants to work that has brands
Yep.
rather than being brands themselves. And I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago when we were talking about developing and designing and building new categories, my Triumph acronym that I like to use. Well, the H in that stands for heuristic. And for those that don't know what a heuristic is, it's a shortcut to either problem solve or to understand a concept. And in its very basic feature, if you combine that with taxonomy and the need to classify, we put a label on everything.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a test here. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm going to say this to our listeners. If right now I said to you, name the class clown in high school, you probably have a name pop into your head.
Yep.
Or if I say, call the person who always helps you out when you need or when you have computer problems. Boom.
Right.
We can shorten that to computer geek.
Right.
Okay. Or name the person that you want to play Trivial Pursuit with.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So you have these names pop into your head. Well, that is the shortcut, the heuristic to something that we filed in our brain, which is the taxonomy. And at that point in time, that person, even a person, has a brand because it has a meaning to which I'm attaching the person's name.
Right.
So the fact that you say you're not a brand is just a myth that's so easy to explode just using human nature,
Yeah.
just the way the mind works.
Right.
And I think what we find in these firms where they say that is that, well, people hire me because of who I network with or because someone referred me. But, when you get referral, it's like asking what's a good movie that you saw lately or what's a good restaurant that you went to. They're not just going to go, oh, I went over here. You're going to ask the next question, which is, well, why?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Right.
hey, Lorraine, tell me about a good Italian restaurant. And you're going to say whatever the restaurant is. And I'm going to go, what'd you like about it? Well,
Yeah.
now you're automatically giving me something to file into my mind. Now, I may or may not agree with you after I go to that restaurant. But the fact is that now that concept is always going to be buried in my brain because you've labeled it for me.
Right. Right.
So everything has a brand regardless, because once you get the meaning into the brain, boom, that's where you branded it, just like the cows.
Right. And that is the perception, and that's the thing that drives. So
Yeah.
that's my perception. That's the image I get. What people fail to look at is it's really important in terms of employees, right?
Mhm.
Because how they think about your company, their perception they have, has a lot to do with their behavior,
Yep.
right?
Very much.
People walk lighter or float if they really feel they're working for a brand that has meaning beyond the doors of just the agency.
Mhm.
And you're right. When someone refers somebody, whether it's an accountant or a financial, they're going to say, "I really like this firm because,"
Yep.
right? They're super responsive, or they're so smart. They share market information I haven't gotten anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
They're going to share part of that brand story with you. They're not just going to give a name. Well, here's a list of names, like they're, like you Googled a bunch of accounting firms near me, right?
Right.
Anybody can do that now. So I don't need a referral. And so really when we worked with clients on positioning, one of the questions we would ask those who would say, well, my whole business is driven by referral. I'm sure it is. But why are people referring you? You ask the why question.
Mhm.
Why are they referring you? Because let's see if we can find something in that to build on in terms of your marketing to make that the overall perception.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There's two exercises that I would encourage our listeners to do if they feel like they work for a company that says they don't have a brand. The first is write a list of all your competitors and what your perception is of your competitors.
Right.
Then ask yourself, well, if I have a perception about my competitors, they certainly have a perception about me. And at that point in time, you can say, well, then I guess I have a brand.
Yep. Right.
The other exercise to do is if you have a lot of reviews on your particular business, if you have a lot of Google reviews, or if you're in the restaurant industry and you're on Yelp, then read through those reviews. And what you'll find is there's a recurring theme.
Yep.
Like, oh, I love their short ribs. And another review says they have the best short ribs in the world. And boy, who can find a better short rib in the area? So all of a sudden now that restaurant's known for their short ribs. And
Right.
I know, Lorraine, as I say that, you're probably thinking of the same place
Yeah.
that I am.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
won't give them free advertising though.
No. They don't need it because
No.
it's a closed market.
Yep. Very good.
But they do
So
have a brand, right?
they do. They do.
Right.
It goes beyond short ribs, but it is
Right.
funny when people talk about them that's what they think. So
Yeah. I mean, how do you become elite? But anyway, I think that's a real and I think a key point for people to understand is what you're saying is if you don't work on honing what brand perception you want that differentiates you, then you already have a brand by default.
mhm,
Let's say your perception is they have great short ribs, but everything else they do is bad. That may not be the perception you want, right?
yeah,
So you have one by default. So you have to be intentional about the position that you're able to have, what you can do best in the world, and stand out doing, and then hone that into your message and your marketing, versus just allowing it to kind of just build on something that maybe isn't important to you or isn't big enough.
yeah. I have a funny story for you, and these are from our friends at Forever Lawn. Um, Brian and Dale have a podcast, so a
Yep.
shout out to them. Um, they were talking one time about they were driving their I think it was just a pickup truck down the road. They were pulling something, and they pulled off at an exit ramp, and all of a sudden the trailer goes right past them that they were supposedly pulling.
Yeah.
So I used that as an illustration at one point, which was, we're all pulling a brand or a meaning behind us. The
Yeah.
question is it taking its own direction
Yes.
and flying by us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we want it always tethered to us. So if you don't work on it, it could have that potential to just fly
That's
off
right.
on its own.
Right. Didn't that happen when you were driving us somewhere and somebody's thing came unhitched?
Oh, no, no, no. The actual trailer started to cause the truck to do
Oh,
its
oh.
own thing, and it flipped over on the truck. That it never detached,
Yeah.
and it
Well,
was in a snowstorm. Yeah,
that's another,
that's a different we'll probably apply that in the future here.
all right. I'll have to think about that one. Yeah.
Yep. So I think what we'll do here is stop. We have a lot of myths to go through,
Mhm.
um, and we got through 4 today. And Lorraine, any other thoughts on our first 4?
No, I think I hope that helps people who are thinking about their company to maybe come at it from a different perspective, from not from the perspective of just continuous improvement, which, as again, we're saying is important,
Mhm.
or making sure you meet table stakes and that you're delivering at least within what's needed within the category and a common need or expectation within the category, but that they come at it with, well, what can we do uniquely, differently, that sets us apart and that adds value to what we're selling in a way that's meaningful to the target audience we really want to cultivate.
Hmm.
And I never want people to walk away and thinking that you're trying to be all things to all people. That's not, you have to decide with positioning. And this sometimes becomes the snafu where people fall off the wagon, is that they feel like, I don't want to alienate these types of customers.
Hmm.
But you have to choose a distinctive customer who cares a lot about your difference. If I were a financial services company, for example, and I worked with a lot of private business CEOs, I might want to focus on that as differentiation, be expert with private business CEOs,
Hmm.
because private business CEOs have unique circumstances that separate them from public companies and that they share in common. And now you have an expertise. And
Hmm.
does that mean I might get a company that's a smaller public company? Sure, they'll come to me because they'll say, we're actually more like a private company than a big public company.
Yeah.
So you'll still get, don't worry about that from a sales standpoint. So anyway, that would be my last comment on what we talked about.
Can I shorten that by saying don't be greedy?
Yeah, don't be
That's
greedy.
what it comes to.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
really
yeah.
does.
So don't be like most American business people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. If you haven't liked, shared, commented, subscribed, and Lorraine, say it again, subscribed,
Right. Subscribe,
please do.
please. It
We
helps.
appreciate,
Helps.
that's right. We appreciate all of our listeners. And until next time, have an
Ain't
amazing
nobody's
day.
business but my own.